Welcome, everyone. Welcome to San Francisco Public Library's Corrette Auditorium. Wonderful. Thank you.
You hear the sheets of sound at the sound of Coltrane. You hear the sheets of sound at the sound of Coltrane. You hear the sheets of sound, it's Coltrane. Hear the sheets of sound, oh, it's Coltrane. Coltrane. Drink 'em in, drink 'em in, drink 'em in Coltrane. Drink 'em in, drink 'em in, drink 'em in Coltrane. Drink 'em in, drink 'em in, drink 'em in. Catch the Coltrane. You hear the sheets of sound. It's Coltrane. You hear.
The auction house is across the street from my home. I found this box loaded with negatives. I won it for $380.
The history of street photography is being rewritten.
Vivian Maya.
Vivian Meyer.
Vivian Maya?
Exhibitions in New York, in LA, in London, Chicago.
We've had more interest in this work than any other photographer.
There's one particular that I bought, which I love. The composition is slightly off to me, and I think that's why I like it.
Vivian was a very private woman.
She was so awesomely unique.
She was not an open person. She was a closed person.
Vivian was my nanny.
Yeah, she was our nanny.
He certainly had no idea she took photographs.
She lived on the 3rd floor in our attic.
This was the forbidden zone.
One of the first things she asked me for was please to put in a lock.
She said, don't ever open this door.
He didn't know there was this creative person there.
She took so many photos.
Around 100,000 negatives, 700 rolls of undeveloped color film, 8mm and 16mm movies.
She would take us and we would just walk in the worst parts of town, and I think she liked that.
You know, maybe we just didn't understand her.
What would you say to Vivian now?
What drove you to hide yourself away? I did her, why the why the didn't you ever show me all the stuff you did? I thought I was a friend of yours.
In death, she is getting the fame she never had in life.
I'm uncovering an artist. If I'm leaving this giant boulder unturned, it would be a mistake.
Of course, she would have hated every minute of it. She would never have let this happen.
She had some compulsive behaviors.
She was a pack rat.
I asked her what she did. Her answer was, I'm sort of a spy.
We would say, what's your name? Miss V. Smith. There's a piece of the puzzle missing.
As she was photographing, she was seeing just how close you can come into somebody's space. That tells me a lot about her. She could generate this moment, and then she's gone.
Is there anything that you wish done differently then?
Sure, I wish I would have found those negatives instead of you.
Wop babaloo blah bam boom tutti frutti, oh Rudy, tutti frutti, oh Rudy. You ain't nothing but a hound. Been snooping. You ain't nothing but a hound dog. You're crying all the time.
Me cry when you said goodbye. Ain't that a shame? You made me cry when you said goodbye. Ain't that a shame? I did shake, rattle, and roll. Shake, rattle, and roll. Shake, rattle, and roll. I said shake, rattle, and roll. I said shake, rattle, and roll.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Oh, thank you. Welcome to the San Francisco Public Library. I'm Shauna Sherman, manager of the African American Center. We are very pleased to be working again with Tracy Brown and Bridges Diasporic Arts for today's program, The Artist's Archive, Protecting Your Intellectual Property and Your History's Future. Welcome to those online as well. Today's program will speak to the very important topic of preserving our legacy for generations to come. Thank you for partnering with us again, Tracy. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge the library is located in the area now known as San Francisco, which is on the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples of the San Francisco Peninsula. As the original peoples of this land, the Ramaytush Ohlone have never ceded, lost, nor forgotten their responsibilities as the caretakers of this place. We recognize that we benefit from living, working, learning on their traditional homeland. As uninvited guests, we affirm their sovereign rights as First Peoples and wish to pay our respects to the ancestors, elders, and relatives of the Ramaytush community. We also honor the gifts, resilience, and sacrifices of our Black ancestors who toiled the land, built the institutions that established this nation's wealth and freedom, and survived anti-Black racism despite never being compensated nor fully realizing their own sovereignty. We acknowledge this exploitation of not only labor, but of our humanity, and we are working to repair some of the harms done by public and private actors. Because of their work, we are here, and we will invest in the descendants of their legacy. So if you didn't already know about the African American Center, it's here on the main library on the 3rd floor, and we are dedicated to collecting books, partnering with community, hosting exhibits, and events like today's presentation. Please visit today if you get a chance, or come by another day, and while you're at it, pick up a library card. A library card can be got by anyone who is a California resident. So before we get started, I want to introduce Tracy Brown, who organized this event. Tracy is an independent curator, artivist, sculptor, installation artist, photographer, public presenter, guest lecturer, and capacity building consultant. She is also the founder and director of Bridges Diasporic Arts. As a result of her work, she was able to compel the world's largest purchasing body, the General Services Administration, to remove the rubber black man from their catalog. Tracy also made significant contributions to the efforts to eradicate the availability of flavored tobacco. She hosted a beautiful exhibit on the topic in the AAC a few years back. Today, she teaches independent workshops to resilient populations. Tracy also serves as a workshop leader with the Center for Artistic Activism and is an independent creative consultant. Will you please join me in welcoming Tracy Brown?
Thank y'all. So happy to see everybody here today and all of our folks online. I'm glad we were able to get today started with beautiful music from our sister Destiny Muhammad. And she has an event coming up. This is a shameless plug for an event she has coming up this Sunday, September 10th at 3 p.m. At the Plymouth United Church of Christ. It's Celtic songs and the music of Alice Coltrane. So that is something you do not want to miss. Excuse me, I want to tell you a little bit about Bridges Diasporic Arts. Excuse me. Tell you a little bit about Bridges Diasporic Arts. We are an organization that explores and celebrates the, excuse me, the connections between Afro-diasporic arts, thank you, spirituality, culture, etc., by conducting visual arts exhibitions, cultural gatherings, as well as organizing and hosting workshops and artist talks. So we serve as a social, educational, and technical resource for Black artists, creators, nonprofits, arts organizations, and various audiences. So we're constantly putting on public programs just like this in the interest of community, to ensure that folks are getting the information that they need to be able to thrive as creative people, but also to be able to live their lives as healthy individuals, culturally connected, etc. So we have some wonderful events coming up later this year that you will hear about at the end of our program. But for now, let's get to what we got to get to. So in picturing us, Deb Willis, who's a contemporary photographer, historian, curator of photography, and so much more, she reminds us that we tell a much more complete and accurate version of our own stories as community people. Our archives highlight the truth of overlooked histories and culture, so they're extremely important. According to an ABC 7 news story, in a community facing the violence of gentrification, changing demographics and social landscapes often mean that cultural erasure is a devastating side effect. According to an ABC 7 news report, San Francisco tops the list of the most gentrified cities in the United States. We know communities like the Fillmore, Hayes Valley, Ingleside, and even over the bridge in West Oakland were made cool by the ever-present and prominent energy of cultural arts produced by its residents, many of whom can no longer afford to live in those areas. As a San Francisco native and a visual artist, I'm honored to have grown up with and continue to have very close, intimate relationships with some of the people who were instrumental in laying the foundation of the Black arts movement in the Bay Area. Too often, evidence of their contributions is either absent or unseen. Much of it is imprisoned in past generation media like reel-to-reel tapes, VHS and Betamax tapes, film slides, vinyl records, etc. Right? I recently had the honor of facilitating a program that I designed and ran at the African American Art and Culture Complex known as the AAACC. Shout out to the twins. It's a program for artists over 60 called Enterprising Creative Seniors, and the participants were a mind-blowingly impressive collection of cultural practitioners who for more than 40 years per person, right? So a collective more than 200 some odd years worth of experience altogether have helped to lay the foundation for Black arts and the general arts landscape in the Bay Area. The event that you are attending today grew out of one of the modules that I cover in the workshop. I realized that the number of people who reach out to me for assistance with archiving their work far surpasses the number that I was able to host in the program. So this is my attempt at serving as many people as possible. There's no reason that people who make truly significant contributions to the history of a thing should not be able to benefit from the evidence of having done so. Sadly, it's impossible for us to host a retrospective of a creative's work and contributions or to tell a complete story of their life's work if we're unable to access the media that serves as documented proof. Additionally, our archives can have historical and monetary value. Why should lifelong cultural contributors not benefit from being compensated for the sharing of the resources that were so painstakingly created and curated and kept? That's key. During the opening, we saw a trailer for a film about Vivian Mayer. And in the film, we learn of a young man who bids on a random trunk and wins it for about $300. He discovers this wonderful treasure trove of amazing photos by a person who's known now as one of the greatest contributors to the genre of street photography ever. I love that this young man took the time to organize and release these images so that they might inspire the world. That said, that's my own personal nightmare. To think that I might make my transition prior to organizing, categorizing, and properly contextualizing my work only to have it end up in a junk shop to be discovered by someone who's not connected to me, who is then able to capitalize on my archive's values. Oh, it's okay. I keep imagining images that I shot of children running through water, shooting from a fire hydrant in Brooklyn, or a photo of two brothers on a motorcycle in Burkina Faso ending up on the walls at TGI Friday. right? Out of context and out of reach of the community for which the images were produced. Friends, do not let friends' art end up as flair on the walls of TGI Friday. Theft is hurtful, and there have been a preposterous number of break-ins in the Bay Area as of late. And it's upsetting because it's a violation of our spaces and of our sense of safety. Imagine how painful it is when someone steals the creative production that has sprung from your spirit. And we saw evidence of that also in one of the videos with Big Mama Thornton and Elvis and the other artists. The collection of the presenters who are being featured here today are going to share about highly accessible tools available to us all right now that will help us to protect our creative legacies. They're by no means the only resources available to do so. So there are lots of different resources that you could use and access to do what the presenters are talking about doing today. That said, it's my assertion that they're excellent choices and examples of the type of and the caliber of resources that you should be searching for if you want to undertake the work of organizing and contextualizing your personal collections. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to introduce our facilitator for today, Quadro Dwayne Dutterville. He is an artist, a writer, a scholar of visual culture, and an all-around good brother. He is an artist, he's a former contra maestra of the African-Brazilian martial art known as capoeira, and his primary area of study is in African and African diasporic cultural expression. Dutterville's independent field research includes trips to Haiti and Brazil to research sacred ground drawings and altars. He's lectured at museums, colleges, and universities on the subject of visual culture as it relates to the African and African diasporic experience. As the co-founder of the Sankofa Cultural Institute, Quadro produced 3 symposiums on the history and aesthetics of jazz. He co-authored a book titled Black Artists in Oakland, which was published by Arcadia in 2007. As a teaching artist, he designed, now see, I done messed something up. Touching stuff, didn't know it was a touch screen. Listen, you go back to whatever it is you were doing. As a teaching artist, he designed lesson plans and curricula to teach art to youth incarcerated in San Francisco, and he received his BFA and an MA in Visual and Critical Studies in 2009 from California College of the Arts here in San Francisco. Dutterville is currently lecture faculty at San Francisco State's Africana Studies Department, and we welcome him without further ado.
Thank you, thank you. Can everybody hear me? Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Oh, okay, all right.
So he is coming up to the lectern.
Okay. You testing. Y'all can hear me? Oh, excellent. My phone just, had some kind of ghost in it all of a sudden. I was just trying to keep track of time, So, first thing I want to do really is acknowledge Tracy Brown because this was a masterful, beautiful idea, and I've been telling her, since she first told me about it, how wide-ranging and profound this topic is, and the need for it is so bad. And I'm hoping that this really should be a once-a-year kind of discussion to keep the momentum going. Okay, so and in light of that, doing 15 minutes or so in regards to this wide-ranging topic is a challenge. It's really a challenge. So I'm going to try and give it a 1,000-foot view, and the experts that we have sitting here to my left, your right, are going to answer basically most of the hard questions and what resources we have available to us in order to answer some of those questions. So it seems to me that as relates to Black intellectuals, Black creatives, and just people, the notion of African diasporic people having intellectual property has always been a challenge for what we now know as, the post-colonial Western civilization. Because being seen as property then, of course, means that you're seen as what, Frank Wilderson might call a speaking implement. You're a tool to a certain degree in Western culture as a result of chattel slavery, right? And so there's a legacy of that thinking about Black intellectual property in general. And for that reason, when something is created, the industries around them and the other creatives, the white status quo creatives around them, do not perceive this as part of a lineage of intellectual properties and an intellectual tradition, right? So one of the big things in just regular parlance comes around to Western civilization itself, and there's a question that hinges on it's kind of an oversimplified question, but that question: were the Egyptians Black? Why is this a big question? Because the question then would shift the notion of where civilization begins, where the origin points of Western civilization. So we can see this is a really important question, just hinging on Black folks, how we move through the world, African ontology and African history. This whole notion of intellectual property in Western culture is really a huge question. In 2023, we have the 50th anniversary of hip hop right now. And online, there's been, some questions too in regards to whether hip hop is the product of the Black experience in New York, or whether it's the product of a multicultural milieu that basically set this thing into motion. The reason I bring this up is because this happens with most of the Black production, Black intellectual production, Black intellectual property and creation in Western culture. And she mentioned that I used to teach capoeira. In Brazil, this African-Brazilian martial art / art form that has, African ritual, music, dance, its own unique set of developing creative gamesmanship type of modes to it. This thing, created by Africans under chattel slavery, was outlawed for many years. There's an instrument called a berimbau, and you could have in some provinces in Brazil, you could have your hand chopped off for being found with this thing, right? Now, moving up to that into the 20th century, there were schools that were opened up where part of the white status quo had access to to this art form and would have someone teach them. And now, in the late 20th century, when I started practicing, and in the 21st century, it's known as the Brazilian national sport. So things are kind of co-opted in that way with these sort of origin myths that turn it into some multicultural milieu that then creates the thing. And in so doing, it covers up the oppression that was battled in order to make the thing happen. In North America, we see the same thing happen with jazz music, even the word jazz and the origins of the word jazz, where everyone wants to own the etymology of the word. There's a scholar here, I believe in San Francisco, that says the word is Irish. We've seen everything from Arabic to French, and Latin origin words, but no one will center around this notion of it being a creolized Kikongo verb or a Bantu language verb, such that Kenigswater Voss said it was in the 1970s, or Robert Ferris Thompson and other Congo scholars have said that it was in the 1980s, right? And the origin points of it being in Congo Square in New Orleans are also kind of glossed over to a certain degree, where in a certain period of time in America, we have, again, the multicultural myth that comes up, that this is just some multicultural milieu that happened and produces jazz, and now jazz is what? America's original art form. Instead of the place where, police used to raid, these places, and they were relegated to houses of prostitution. The music makers were relegated to houses of prostitution. Since we're on the topic of jazz, there are three very famous instances where the intellectual property of probably a handful of the greatest musical geniuses of the 20th century have been appropriated. There's a business was he a CEO? John Hammonds was a high-ranking executive in Columbia Records. And John Hammonds was also the manager for Billie Holiday. And he talked Billie Holiday into recording all these sides, hundreds of them, for Columbia Records for I said 0 royalties. So Billie Holiday received not a penny of royalties for all of those classic pieces of music that she did for Columbia Records. This same gentleman, John Hammond, realized that the same thing had happened to Bessie Smith a few years earlier, right? Where Bessie Smith got no royalties for all of those classic, really, iconic recordings that she did that, could be said to be the birth of the recording industry itself. And so she got no royalties, but to add insult to injury, John Hammonds received the only royalties paid for Bessie Smith's recordings of that time when they were reissued in the 1970s. So this man basically made hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars profit off the labor of a black woman, several years his senior, and had done labor, decades before he came into the business. There's also the notion of Joe Glazer, the manager of Louis Armstrong. Louis Armstrong had written an autobiography of something he really wanted to tell the truth about, and he had titled the autobiography Gage. Gage is a street name, New Orleans street name for marijuana, right? Now his manager, whom he had known for a long period of time and somewhat of a gangster in the business, he basically erased or destroyed a good portion of that particular writing and that autobiography because he didn't like the image that it would present to Louis Armstrong's audience. So these white administrators and managers of the music are basically taking autonomy with the very historical narratives of these people and profiting from them. The third and last one I'll mention is Duke Ellington. And Duke Ellington's not manager really, but a publisher named Irving Mills. And Irving Mills ended up signing his name to a lot of classic, Duke Ellington compositions, and he received royalties from those, 50% royalties as the co-author of these pieces. And he didn't compose any of those things. You'll see Irving Mills' name on there. The question becomes now, even at this stage of the game, who is really running these estates? Who really owns the image and likeness of Duke Ellington and the music, et cetera, and so forth? I don't really know. In some newer instances now, there have been some changes where people like John Coltrane and Miles Davis are in control of, or rather their relatives and their descendants are in control of their estates and their image, et cetera, and so forth. But that's a very recent occurrence, okay, in the history of the music. For the most part, what we've seen is the very notion, like I said before, of black intellectual property being really what's at stake, what's really on the table. Is there going to be an open acknowledgement of that? And in that open acknowledgement, will we be able to act upon it? So what we have today, I have no idea how long I just went with that. Okay. What we have today are 4 experts, and believe me, I'm excited about this because I had the pleasure of sitting in the green room with them backstage, and they are going to be able to answer some questions in regards to what tools we have available to us to be able to reverse that notion and maintain control of our intellectual property and our creativity, and not only that, but to be able to archive things and archive them in a way where our subsequent generations can have access to them and also reap the benefits. And let's be clear about what we mean by that. We mean the monetary benefits and autonomy with the history of its creation and its use, that type of thing, okay? So these people will be able to provide us with those tools. I want to mention just a couple of people because some of this stuff is, to my mind, very, very interesting. On our panel today, we have a panelist who is the owner of Digital Roots. It's a family-run business, a husband and wife duo, Sean and Andrea. They established it in 2012. The reason I'm mentioning this is because of this person that I just recently discovered named Marion Stokes. Show of hands, how many people have heard of Marion Stokes? I heard that. That's the way I reacted. Marion Stokes is this black woman who purchased a Betamax VCR in 1975 and began recording television shows 24/7 for the next, 50 years or something like that. And she amassed the greatest single collection of television show archive of any person in the world. This one black woman who I've never heard of before. She was a journalist and an activist, but she gathered all these things together and created this, this personal archive, which is something else I'm hoping to go into with our panelists, the value of the personal archive, how we keep those, and how we, bequeath them to subsequent generations. Okay, I want to make sure I mention that. And perhaps at some point, too, I might be able to talk to some of our other panelists here, Janet Hicks and MJ Bogatin, about the notion of artists that are also archivists. There are some of us who create art and are also archivists as well. Some of the more famous artists now, black artists, are Theaster Gates, who took the entire Jet and Ebony collection, and he archived this in this building that he had built as a project in Chicago. And there's also Jason Moran, who's a great pianist, young pianist composer, who is currently the main curator for the Louis Armstrong estate, and has also, over the years, amassed his own personal collection of things like, the personal matchbook set of Bud Powell and things of that nature, so things he's picked up in auction. So I'm hoping that all these things that I kind of laid out on the table will spark some conversation. And what I'm going to do right now is move on to our first panelist. Get this together here. Yeah. Our first panelist is going to be Janet Hicks. So. It's okay. It's all good. Yeah, the way I feel about these things, these types of discussions, is that we have some sheet music, and like a good jazz band, we're going to improvise on this sheet music. Yeah. So something that somebody says is going to spark an idea for someone else, and here today we're going to talk about some things that haven't been talked about before. So it's my pleasure now to introduce Janet Hicks, the Vice President and Director of Licensing at the Artists' Rights Society. Janet is Vice President at ARS and serves on the Executive Committee of the Visual Arts arm of CISAC, known as CIAGP, the International Council of Creators of Graphic, Plastic, and Photographic Arts. She is also the ARS representative for IFFRO, the International Federation of Reproductive Rights Organization. At ARS, she handles advertising, film, and television, uses as well as major museum exhibits and international and membership relations. She has an MA in art history from the University of Oregon and is also a curator and advocate for emerging contemporary and outsider artists at her art gallery, 1 Mile Gallery. All right, so everybody, please welcome to the podium, Janet Hicks.
Hi, is this okay? A little closer? Hi, because I'm doing a visual here, I'm up at the podium rather than sitting with my colleagues, which I'm looking forward to having a more fulsome discussion with them later. But one of the biggest foundations in my mind, and I think a lot of people's minds, for a good artist and the legacy of an artist is to be a good steward of your own intellectual property. So I'm going to do a brief summary of copyright basics and a little bit about Artists' Rights Society and what we can do for individual artists, estates, foundations, and other organizations that manage intellectual property. So do I get to do this with me? Oh yeah, good, okay. So what we'll be covering is about Artists' Rights Society, the company I work for. We're in New York. I will also add I have many takeaways for people, a little bit about Artists' Rights Society, including our membership applications, so please do see me to get a card or any information afterwards. We'll also do a Copyright 101, the basics. Also some licensing basics, some requests that maybe you as artists receive and how to tackle them. And we'll do a little advanced study, Copyright 102, talk about some other avenues of funding that goes to artists, things like reprography, and some other activities that Artist Rights Society is championing for to expand the rights of artists in the US and to get them paid more. So about Artist Rights Society, this is a quote off of our website, which I think is quite apt about what we do. We believe in artists are an essential part of society, helping to both broaden and challenge our understanding of and connection to our culture, our beliefs, and our humanity. We talked about this in the green room before. Artists are one of the main pillars of the entire GDP of the United States, you know, where obviously the creative arm of visual arts is one small fraction, but it spreads out like a giant creative ecosphere, and you know, those people in the visual arts help to employ people in the publishing arts, help to employ people in the museum arts. We're all connected, so we have to support everyone. We at Artist Rights Society were founded in 1987 at the behest of a French organization that was doing the same thing, that's celebrating 70 years next year of visual arts management in France. And we're part of an organization called CISAC that represents 122,000 artists globally. A lot of those artists you will never have heard of, maybe about 200 or 300 if you're a great art historian you'll have heard of, and we focus on sort of licensing not only those artists that you have heard of, but those artists that you haven't heard of that need a little help on licensing a request that they get that's a little confusing. We work in a variety of different industries. As I mentioned before, we are part of this giant ecosphere, so not only museums, things you would find obvious, but consumer products, film and TV, it's a big part. Our two main prongs of what we do at Artist Rights Society is protect and promote. We protect artists, their intellectual property, make sure that they're not being infringed upon, make sure that they are not signing adverse contracts, and we promote those artists that want to have more licensing deals in place to try to get them maybe deals to have a new product made with their work on it, et cetera. Now to Copyright 101. Copyright, as many of you I'm sure know, is a type of intellectual property right that protects a work of original authorship as soon as the author fixes the work in a tangible form expression. So this is creating a painting or making a photograph. Creators own that copyright to the work and that they author, and the ownership of the work does not transfer the copyright. So if you sell your work to somebody, they do not have the right to reproduce it, only you have that right. Something that comes up quite a lot is work for hires, hence the 2 asterisks, especially photographers and illustrators. They might have to do work for hire agreements for magazines or other editorial uses. So that is a transfer, but that is not something that comes up that often. Was something we were also talking about in the green room is once it's created post-1978, once the copyright laws were codified here in the US, it is copyrighted. You can register your work in, at the Copyright Office, which is a somewhat laborious process, and there is expense, especially if you have a lot of work, but you can enforce and charge for your work without registering your copyright. What is copyrightable? We just sort of went over this already, but a work of human authorship in a fixed tangible medium that is original, and that's copyrightable. Things that aren't copyrightable are sort of concept or ideas. Like, for example, we represent the estate of Alexander Calder, who did a lot of mobiles. That does not mean that they own the copyright on any mobile that is created. So if you know, someone else does a mobile, obviously they are allowed to do that, but what they're not allowed to do is to create something that looks exactly like a Calder mobile. So how do artists manage their copyright? The author of the work can manage that directly or transfer that to someone else to manage them, that copyright directly. When an artist passes, they can give the grant of rights to their next of kin or to a foundation that they create or a museum, and they can hire an agency like Artists' Rights Society to manage that for them. I think a lot of people are overwhelmed with the idea of copyright. They receive maybe numerous requests, or the kind of requests they receive seems sort of very confusing, or maybe not worth the time and effort that it takes to do a thorough job of marking up a contract. So that's why a lot of people come to ARS, because we do that for you. The US copyright term is different from the normal copyright term that exists in most nations. Most nations, well, including the US at this time, is the life of the artist plus 70 years. So when Pablo Picasso died in 1973, his copyright term will still have another 20 years to go before it expires. That said, there are some complexities in US copyright law that go to the publication history of the work. So some works can be extended for over that time period, 95 years after the first publication history. So there's some complexities there, but the best rule of thumb is the life of the artist plus 70 years. So we have a little quiz if anyone wants to participate in this. When is a work protected? For 70 years after the death of the artist, or depends on when it was first published, or depends on the country, or all of the above. Yes, it's all of the above. Sorry, easy questions here, but keep things engaged, you know? I'm up here talking and it's, you know, it could get dry. So public domain is a thing that comes up a lot. You know, what is the public domain? It's not things that are reproduced out in the public. Just because a piece of sculpture is in the public does not mean it's in the public domain. It means that the term has expired. So it's 70 years after the artist's death, or in very rare occasions, maybe they waive their copyright fee, et cetera. 2 minutes? Oh my gosh, do I have to go faster? Okay, let's skip over this. Well, yeah, let's skip over that. That's the answer. Fair use is a huge question that comes up, and my answer to this is, or my question about this is, you know, what is fair use? There is no easy answer. The Copyright Act provides a framework for what it is, which is review, criticism, commentary on certain things. It is not something you come to someone and say, could I have a fair use agreement? It is something that you take as a position, that I don't have to clear rights because the kind of use that I have falls under fair use, which would be, for example, a scholarly article, because that's more educational in nature under the fair use. These are the kinds of licensing we do at ARS. As I mentioned, a lot of variety of different uses, merchandise, museums, et cetera. Licensing agreements, the kind of license we do depends on a variety of things, the scale, the territory of distribution, retail selling price, et cetera. We get all these factors in place before we issue a license for you. And these are sort of the key figures or words that you would look for in any sort of agreement. Red is bad, green is good. So if someone sends you an agreement to sign that says, we want an exclusive license, you really want to make sure that that says a non-exclusive license, because you want to keep your options open. Same for assignable or sublicensable, should be non-transferable. Perpetual, you'd really want to keep those terms limited for any sort of license. I have a museum sample, but I'm going to skip over this because I think we have not that much time. Copyright 102. There are so many ways that we could get money to artists, not just direct licensing, but also reprography, which is basically sort of photo copyrights or taxes that exist in other countries other than the US, like in Europe, where you get taxed on your cell phone. And some of that money goes into a pool that goes to visual artists. So being a member of Artists' Rights Society means you get a lot of access to these other rights that artists wouldn't have normally. And we at Artists' Rights Society are constantly championing to get greater rights, including a resale rate for artists. So that means when an artist sells their work and then it goes into the secondary market and sells again, the artist will get a percentage back on that secondary sale. We're also trying to expand rights by talking about AI and trying to get compensation for artists for the ingestion of work in AI generative models, and try to expand collective management rights in general. We're going to have a Q&A with everyone, so I'm going to just exit the stage at this point, but thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to chatting with everyone else about rights.
Hello, hello. Can everybody hear me? All right. So our next expert coming to the stage is MJ Bogatin for the California Lawyers of the Arts. MJ is a founding member of the San Francisco Bay Area law firm of Bogatin, Corman, and Gold. For over 40 years, his practice has emphasized art, entertainment, and intellectual property law. He is the co-author of the Legal Guide for the Visual Artist. His visual arts practice includes representation of artists with large public art commissions and moral rights litigation claims. He has served as chairman of the board of California Lawyers of the Arts and as general counsel to many nonprofit arts organizations. He maintained a BLAWG on visual art licensing for several years and regularly serves as a featured speaker on artists' legal rights for both live audiences and in webcasts online. Everybody, please welcome to the podium, or actually, are you gonna do this from here, or are you gonna do the podium? Okay, please welcome to the podium, MJ Bogatin.
I'm going to talk about California Lawyers for the Arts, which is a terrific service organization. But before I jump into talking about its programs, I just want to reflect on the comments that Dwayne and Janet have been sharing with us, and at least my sense that what we are all talking about today is how to protect our intellectual property interests. Longtime member of California Lawyers for the Arts, which was established way back in 1974 as the first volunteer Lawyers for the Arts group or association in California. It was a novel thing at the time for a bunch of lawyers to get together and enlist a bunch of artists to join them and say, what can we do together to protect artists' interests, to make the intellectual property interests of artists preserved and monetized. It's a member-based organization, but anybody can attend any of the programs that they have, and CLA sponsors many educational and public programs. When it got started in the 70s, one of its primary activities was arts advocacy. At that time, it was instrumental in getting the California legislature to pass a bunch of arts-oriented legislation. Specifically, it included the enabling legislation for live work, which wasn't legal before that time, and creating live-work housing for artists. It passed the artist dealer or artist gallery relations law to protect artists' rights vis-a-vis the galleries and dealers who represent them. It passed the fine print statutes, which help to protect the intellectual property of artists who make limited editions and duplicates of their artwork, to make sure that these limited editions are properly certified so that they can be priced at the appropriate and not copied and devalued because of their proliferation in the public. Then there was the Art Preservation Act. There's been a mention of moral rights already, and Janet talked about Alexander Calder, a story about the origins of artists' moral rights is when Calder was in the Pittsburgh airport, Allegheny County. People at the airport claimed that they were being made nervous by the giant mobile that was in that airport. And so the Allegheny County had the great idea of fixing all the moving parts, painted it the county colors of orange and gold. which greatly offended Calder when he was traveling through Pittsburgh. At the time, in the U.S., there was no law that prevented this. California was the first to enact a statute that addressed specifically these artists' rights, the artist's moral right, that there's a damage to the artist's reputation if someone is intentionally alters or destroys their artwork. And so these have become actionable, not only in California, but nationally with the passage of the Visual Artists' Rights Act of 1990 by the federal government. Now, these types of legal claims, these types of legal protections can be learned about and done on by artists themselves. But you should know that there, at least in California and in most states, there are volunteer lawyers for the arts who provide attorneys available to help protect these interests and ultimately, if needed, to bring copyright infringement actions, trademark infringement actions, or take steps to stop someone from the misuse of intellectual property, restore those rights to the artist, and get damages, get monetary damages in the process. So one of the main programs of CLA is a lawyer referral service. There have been a couple hundred attorneys in California who are available to consult for free, half-hour consultation with any artist or anybody who has an arts issue, including these arts archive issues, even if they're family members who've inherited it. These attorneys, there are members of the panel anyway, who have a special interest in protecting these rights and know how to go about it. For myself, I deal with, I spend a lot of time with the Ernest Withers Family Trust. Withers is the photographer out of Memphis, my hometown, who documented the civil rights movement and ultimately the garbage strike in Memphis that resulted in Martin Luther King's assassination. You all may know his most famous work, which is the garbage workers holding their signs, "I am a man." Without the legal protections that were taken on behalf of Withers and his family, those images would all have found their way into the public domain and be generally available without compensation to originally Mr. Withers and now his heirs. So I'm very proud of the fact that we can take these steps and protect these interests, as Janet said, for 70 years following the death of the creator artist. I'd say that I want to mention on these lawyer referrals that there is a financial screening that you can allow to be taken if a person who needs these services is below a certain number amount in income. They may qualify for pro bono, free lawyer services, or modest means, which we offer, where lawyers who may charge $300, $400, $500 an hour will lower their fee to $50, $60, or $70 an hour in order to accommodate the artist's needs who has the financial situation that qualifies. Education programs. CLA sponsors a YouTube channel with many of its videos available there, but they are always creating new webinar and live presentation materials. They're filming them now, and those are available to members, typically without charge. I would like to mention that the next webinar is on the 13th, and the subject is artificial intelligence and copyright. So anyone who has an interest in this topic should go to the California Lawyers for the Arts website, CLA Lawyers for the Arts, CLAforthearts.org, and you can sign up there. One other important educational tool, educational information available on that website is in California the toolkit for AB5, which I helped author, and which really tells everything that one might want or need to know in California about does someone qualify to be an independent contractor versus having to be employed as a legal employee under the new labor laws in California. And the ABC rule of AB5 is spreading across the country. It will eventually become the law of the land. It's just going to take some time for that to happen. Arts Arbitration and Mediation Service is an award-winning program of CLA in which parties can avoid legal court process in a dispute. They can take their civil disputes to mediation, and this is all facilitated by this program of CLA. They will find qualified, neutral mediators trained in the art of mediation to facilitate a discussion between the people in dispute to help find a win-win solution as to them and what they're arguing about. It's successful in avoiding further legal action 90% of the time. So if you can imagine avoiding court and all the expense and hassles and emotional distress, and now 1 and 2 and 3 years wait to get a courtroom and have complaints heard, mediation is a great alternative, as is arbitration. Arbitration is when a qualified person serves as a private judge for this dispute. And the parties will have the opportunity to present their cases to the arbitrator, and the arbitrator rules on it, writes an award. I can take those awards right over to the courthouse and have them turned into judgments, and in the process avoid all the rigmarole and the costs of a legal trial, juries, motions, discovery, etc., and proceed right to collection of that judgment. Finally, I want to mention our new Designing Creative Futures program. This is an arts-focused 4-month part-time paid internship for the formerly incarcerated. We look to place interns with established art businesses for on-the-job training and mentoring. So far, there have been over 100 interns who've been placed in the state of California, and this program is growing in import and recognition. Well, that's all I'll have to say for now, and I will welcome questions online and otherwise following our presentations. Thank you.
Right. That's a lot of interesting stuff that we can unpack here a little bit later on, too. That raised a couple of questions for me. So next up, we have Cassidy Cole. Cassidy Cole is a production education lead at Artwork Archive. She's a visual artist and product education at Artwork Archive, and she's dedicated to helping artists boost productivity, gain visibility, preserve their artistic legacies, and craft sustainable careers. As an exhibiting artist and documentary filmmaker based in LA, Cassidy couples her firsthand experience with product expertise. She intimately understands the challenges facing today's creatives and translates that insight into impactful training. So, hey, everybody, welcome to the stage, or welcome to the podium, Cassidy Cole.
Well, thanks, Tracy. It's just so great to be here with such a fantastic panel. I am just going to talk about Artwork Archive. So we are a cloud-based art inventory platform, one of the first ones. I was actually using it as an artist before I joined the team. The origin story started with one of our co-founders who is a software engineer. His mom, being an incredible fine artist, lost years of really valuable information to a hard drive crash. So she had a lot stored on a single hard drive, it crashed. She lost so much valuable information, and it was just tragic. And him, being the software engineer and a really great son, thought there's got to be something online or something, you know, cloud-based where you have a backup, it's protected, and it's got to be specific to artists, because the information for artists and creatives and what you're saving is so important and so unique, and he couldn't find one. So he started building one just for her, and she used it, and then of course word got out to her friends, so he started building it out for more people, and then the rest is history. So that's where we started. We are built specifically for artists. We also have collectors, and art organization versions as well. So we work with artists who are early stage all the way to established artists who have been working for decades, and also artist estates. And with the organization plan, we also work with global collections that are managing, you know, complex collections all over the world. And we have users in over 160 countries now, which is kind of insane. But what I love about it is when I was beginning my art career, one of my mentors was beginning to do a lot of museum shows. And I said, you know, do you have one piece of advice for a little old artist like me, like starting out? If you could tell me anything, what it would be? And he said, start keeping track of where your art is, who has it, and, you know, just a little bit about it, because if you want to get into museum shows, if you want to, you know, grow in your career, you're going to have to do it one way or the other. So you either do it now, or you're going to have to follow the crumbs later. And it's so important. And so what I love about working with Artwork Archive and working with all the artists that I get to work with is it's all about owning your own legacy. When you keep the details and the description of the artwork, you know, a lot of the time we're just keeping track of kind of the tombstone information on a scrap of paper, or we're keeping it in an Excel file, or, you know, Google Drive. Whatever system you use is great, just as long as you actually have a system. So, you know, use Artwork Archive or don't, but also know what's possible to keep track of. I love thinking about a piece record, and I don't have a slide, so envision this in your head. But what we call piece records, which is where you store all of the information about an individual work of art, I call it the story of that piece, because you can put the description in the piece record. You can keep notes that are private to you. You can keep track of where it was, what shows it was a part of. You know, a lot of the time as artists, we're keeping track of a CV of what shows we were involved in, but we're actually not actively keeping track of what pieces were in those shows, which is really important to collectors. And it's really important to tell the story of that entire piece. One of my other favorite stories that I heard recently was this artist who had been making work for decades, and she had it stored all over her studio, which I can relate as well. And it's just, you know, piece after piece after piece, but she wasn't selling her work, and she wasn't able to really share it because she hadn't, you know, it was overwhelming to think about inventorying that art. So she had someone help her finally, you know, digitize, take note of the value of each piece, take note of sizing and all this information, and she realized that she had over $1 million worth of art around her studio, which seeing that number was really impactful for her, because it meant that if she was able to start sharing her work and getting it out, she could make a really great living off of her creative practice. And that was a wake-up call for her. And I thought that was so important, because if we're not keeping track of this information, we have it all in our head and it blocks us, and it, you know, we're trying to keep track of contacts, we're trying to keep track of our income and taxes and all that, and we have to wear so many hats as artists. I mean, I feel like we are required to be everything all the time, all at once. And we also are just expected to, whether we go to school for it or not, expected to know then how to make a living and be a professional out in the world. And I know that a lot of my colleagues also feel like, you know, there's always this thing we don't know, like where do we find all this information? It feels like maybe everyone else knows and we don't, but that's not necessarily the case. It's just everyone's got their own unique journey, and it's really about us sharing with each other. And so, you know, you are the only one that can tell the story about your own work. You're the only one that can own your legacy. You're the only one that knows the process of the piece, the cultural context, what was happening around you at that time, what might have inspired you. And then when you pass on, you get to share that with, whoever is going to continue your legacy. They're not going to know why you made this piece, who is in it, what the materials exactly were. And that's so important for you to have your work in major collections, or also be considered for great shows happening at the same time with other artists participating. So I know that archive, as Artwork Archive sounds like it's something you do at the end of your life. It's something that you do when you've passed. It's something that artists do, it's something that people research. But we always talk about the living archive, and that's what is actively happening now. And that's what you are actively kind of not required, but it's really responsible to be doing that. And whether it's, like I said, on a sheet of paper, on a cloud-based inventory system, I just recommend you start doing it regardless. On Artwork Archive, another thing I'll say is we have the ability to share your work privately or publicly. So half the time, we can keep track of our work, but if we're not sharing it, then no one knows it exists, and no one can understand where you're coming from, what, is valuable about this piece, why it's important. It's all about the context. And so you can upload all of your pieces onto an inventory platform, and then it never has to be publicized if you want to keep it completely private and you just want to use it as your own personal inventory organization and management. That is great. Everything by default is private. And then you can choose to share your work via a private room where once you have uploaded all of your pieces, you can pick and choose quickly, share it just like you would, in an email, but you're not overwhelming the email with high-resolution images, because we all know that we've tried and it never works in a single email. And then you also have the ability to share your work publicly with a public profile. And that also kind of takes the legwork off of having to design an entire website or be, put on the hat of being a really skilled web designer or software engineer. That's just another hat we're having to put on. So what we try to do is make it as easy as possible for artists to manage, organize, and ultimately grow their careers so that they're able to, it's a little bit of legwork up front, and we have resources available to you as well via, bulk importing or whatever you need to help you get the process started. We have incredible video tutorials online. We have a chat that is always going to our team, so it'll never go to a robot. We are really passionate about customer service, so there's a little chat icon in the bottom right corner that you can always reach out to us. We have an email, team@artworkarchive.com as well. And yeah, that's what I have to say about Artwork Archive. So please come see me if you have any questions, but I'm grateful to be here. Yeah.
All right. That sparked a whole lot of questions for me. A lot of good ideas and resources that you just mentioned there. Questions I didn't know I had got answered right there. So our next speaker, I'm particularly excited to introduce because of the Marion Stokes person that I just mentioned a moment ago when I was talking. Our next speaker is Andrea Sexton Dumas of Digital Preservationist, Andrea Sexton Dumas, who is the co-founder of Digital Roots Studio. It's a family-owned and operated digitization house in Albany, California. As a digital preservationist and storyteller, she deeply values intergenerational exchange, instilled in her by her grandmother and niece. In addition, Andrea is an end-of-life doula and grief tender, hosting the podcast Recipes for Grief. Wow, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. Here's yet another thing, another service that you offer that I want to take advantage of. All right. So please welcome to the stage digital preservationist, podcast host, and grief doula, Andrea Sexton Dumas.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I do want to just start off by thanking Shauna and the San Francisco Library. Many, many gratitudes to Tracy for having me here today, as well as Dwayne for the intro that he gave in the beginning of our session today. I'm really glad I added the grief piece to my bio because all roads lead to grief for me. So I have to say something before we even talk about digitization. I need to speak on the grief that I'm feeling in my body from when Dwayne gave his introduction. Just the harm that's been done to Black bodies, Indigenous bodies, to the land, to immigrant bodies. I'm just really, I feel very charged, actually. So I just had to speak it out loud, just honor this grief that I'm feeling. And on the other side of grief, I also just want to say, throughout our presentations today, I've heard the voice of a baby in the back of the room, and that has just filled me with joy, right? Yes, we live in a capitalistic society. Yes, artists, we do want to be paid for our time. You know, we should be paid. But at the end of the day, the whole reason we're doing any of this is for them. So I just wanted to speak that. Thank you. So yes, my husband and I started a digitization company in our living room 11 years ago, Digital Roots Studio. We now have a proper office in Albany, California. And yes, so we digitize analog media. You know, that's the short answer, right? So your videotapes, your slides, your film, even documents, letters, paper, your photographs, your watercolors. We can digitize all of that. And also, the other thing I always want to speak on is you doing it yourself. Get started yesterday, y'all, okay? So for a company like us, it costs money. There are other companies out there. We're a little mom and pop company. You know, there's big international corporations that you can use. But honestly, just go home and take photographs on your cell phone of your most important pieces. Just do it tonight. No big deal. I so appreciated when Cassidy shared the story of how the company she works for was founded. I have certainly had a hard drive crash. My home has been burglarized and my hard drive was stolen. Fire, water damage, you know, you spill tea on your laptop. You know, we've all done all of these things. I've done all of them, actually. So, you know, it's just really important to get started on making sure that your materials are digitized, archived, outlined. You know, we've discussed it a little bit, but the other, you know, elephant in the room that I bring is death, and unexpected death specifically. And so as an artist, when you have this beautiful collection, you have, you know, whether it's your poetry that you've written, you know, music that you've recorded, if something happens to you unexpectedly, where does all this information go? Who will be the caretaker, the tender of your memories and of your legacy? So I know at our business, trust is a big thing. People get very nervous to bring their most prized materials to a stranger and have a stranger digitize it. So I also wanted to speak today on just the trust that is required in everything that we're discussing. I know myself as a creative person, sometimes I get a little controlling and a little bit nervous about sharing my, you know, again, my prized possessions with others. And I'm going to encourage all of us to go ahead and extend some trust to someone. Have someone else be your backup. You know, Cassidy's company does things in the cloud. A lot of people ask me about this at work. Well, Andrea, do you use a cloud? As I just admitted, I am a little bit controlling, so I do not, but I've got 3 hard drives. I've got one at the office, I've got one at home, I've got one at my sister's house. I rotate them, I update them, you gotta check in on them. So regardless of how you are archiving your materials, there will be homework. Do your homework. I also just wanted to speak to that overwhelm that we feel. I always laugh with our clients, just getting to my office is the hardest part of the entire situation. You know, you gathering your materials, you getting it prepared, you getting ready to trust a stranger. That is the worst part of everything that we do at our office, is just getting there, dropping it off. So again, just to remind the artist, the whole reason you're doing this is because you have something to express, you have something to say, you have something that you want to share with people. So do your due diligence in the evenings, on the weekends, do your homework to make sure that you are preparing your materials, archiving them, putting that information that's so needed, especially for museums and buyers, collectors who want your art in their homes, they want them in your galleries. And so just making sure that you continue to just stay on top of it. That is another hat that you have to wear. So I often encourage people, again, coming back to that, what if something happens unexpectedly question, do you have someone designated to take care of your, your affairs, right? So this is getting to a slightly different conversation. Make sure your affairs are in order, get your wills in order. But also, as an artist, to have someone who you trust in your life and go to them and have this hard conversation. Hey, if something happens to me unexpectedly, we know this won't happen. We'll be here for another 50 years. However, just in case, would you be willing to maintain my hard drive? Here's my password to my Artist Archive account. Please log in, make sure that my payments are updated because I want my materials to live. Put it in your will, right? Here are my artistic materials. This is what I want you to do with them if I am not here. So just making sure that you have your homework. I'm so grateful that some of our fellow presenters have brought up this AI question. One thing that we were also talking about, the green room was a whole situation. Can I just say that? We had a good time in the green room just getting to know each other and learning from each other. AI is going to do what it does. Tech is going to do what it does. But I also just really want to underscore the physical reaction that we all have to art. Dwayne mentioned the smell of an oil painting, and I cannot stop thinking about it. I cannot stop thinking about, the smell of an oil painting, the sound of a vinyl record. My goodness, seeing Beyonce in person. I didn't go. I know people who did, and they're like, it was actual life-changing. Like, it is different than the screen, trust and believe. You need to see the art in person, right? All roads lead to grief, and all roads also lead to my grandmother. And so, we started our business out of necessity and out of know-how, but truly, what started the business was me as a young child, sitting on my grandmother's couch, pulling back, the pages of a photo album, and her telling me the stories of our people. Where do we come from? Who were we? Where are we going? What do we value? What did we eat? Those stories that otherwise would be lost. And one thing that Dwayne brought up so beautifully in the green room was the young children. And are they going to have those same experiences that we did with art, with history, with legacy, with our inheritances? So, just making sure that we are all, as artists, as the backup for artists, whatever your role is, that we are archiving, saving, sharing, perhaps most importantly, sharing, especially today, with these younger generations, not only so that our art lives on, but that our stories also live on. Thank y'all so very much.
Pick up the mic. Okay, that was beautiful. So many things that all of the panelists touched on here this afternoon have brought up some questions for me, and really just some profound thoughts, because I'm reflecting now on even when I walked in the door and looked at the photographs on the wall, and I doubt if the people that are online can see these photographs that are on the wall. And one particular photograph that was in the green room that we talked about for a minute, at least Tracy and I talked about it for a minute. There are photographs lining the wall that are clearly from someone's photographic album, or from various families' photographic albums, and they're blown up, and each one of them, seems to, carry this kind of magnitude to it because you know that it's been archived. That's what brings the magnitude to it. It's larger than it was originally, and it's on display, those types of things. But what happened was, originally, somebody in the case of the photograph in the green room, in 1967 said, I am gonna preserve this moment of this little girl right here. And now that little girl is one of the librarians, here in the, in the library. There's that, and you mentioned the baby and the sounds of the baby in the room, and for me this is just really special because these are my relatives. The baby is my cousin's daughter here, and he came all the way out here from New Orleans, and just what was it? A matter of weeks ago, maybe less than a month or so ago, we all went to the plantation where our ancestors were enslaved in Louisiana. And the names of, family name Detterville is on the wall in the slave quarters, the displays that they have for the slave quarters, and this whole history, which I won't go into. But for me, this has been just a really kind of a real whirlwind of emotions that come up just in regards to the archive and who it is. I'm gonna pass stuff along to, and my wife and I are having these conversations about the grandkids and all that kind of stuff. So I just had to get that out for a minute, because as people are talking, all this stuff is kind of hitting me in the face. I want to dovetail on your mention of artificial intelligence in this great combo that we had just for a moment there in the green room. And what I'm going to do is start with MJ here, because you had mentioned an event happening with the California Lawyers for the Arts, where a lot of these complex conversations are going to be happening. And I think probably the main question that a lot of us have in this moment is, with the notion of artificial intelligence stretching so far ahead of our understanding, what stage now is the legal language at in regards to people taking or appropriating the styles and imagery, I guess, of previous artists or even living artists?
Well, the headlines are saying that there are a lot of legislative and executives in various states and in Washington, D.C., who are looking hard at the question of AI and to what extent that it might compromise the human condition. It is a very dangerous technology on the one hand, and on the other, it's an amazing new technology that can ostensibly create not only visual art or music, but new concepts and new ideas out of those that we've conceived of, but have not taken that next step as a species. I think that the laws will be required, because as the 1% get a hold of this, it can be used, I think, to advance their interests more than anyone else's. So there needs to be a democratic treatment of AI, and there needs to be an economic consideration, because there are a lot of artists, graphic artists, visual artists right now, and probably musicians to come, and writers, who are going to have their livelihoods damaged by the fact that commercial use of imagery will turn to that is generated from AI, and there is no copyright holder, so there is no license necessary, and that jeopardizes many different professional lives in the arts.
Any other thoughts in regards to AI from the panelists? I know we talked a bit about it, and I know that people have comments on this.
Sure.
notion.
Well, just to follow up, this on? Just to follow up on that, we were talking about this before as well. Our organization, Artist Rights Society, we're members of the Copyright Alliance, which represents a whole host of different kinds of intellectual property right holders, artists, writers, etc. We are working on legislation, a legislative proposal to try to receive some compensation for those artists and authors and creators whose work was already ingested in generative AI. I want to be clear, we want to be supportive of creativity and innovation, and AI is part of that. You know, a lot of our member artists use AI as a tool, and that's how I'd like to see it as. But what we're looking for is some sort of compensation and acknowledgement and credit for the ingestion that has already taken place. And we're working really hard to try to get something like that enacted, and hopefully at least build some awareness with people. I think it's already growing. I think a lot of people understand that this is a powerful tool that should be used in a proper way.
Anybody else? Yeah. I'm thinking about this because of Hip Hop 50 as well, you know, the 50th anniversary. And I feel like, you know, part of this is very exciting because when something stretches into an area where you can't answer questions, you know you're standing on the precipice of some historical moment. And so that there's an aspect of that that I really like. And of course, there's these other daunting, you know, aspects of it too. But it's sort of like the genesis of when sampling started to happen as well. And people are like, you know, hey, can you do that? Can you take somebody else's record and, you know, scratch it up and alter it and do things to it just 'cause, you know? And it's basically changed the face of Western culture because it's the most popular culture now on the planet. 2 turntables and a mic is more ubiquitous than the electric guitar. And if we think about the electric guitar and synthesizers didn't really put out of business the notion of hearing live acoustic guitar and somebody who's put in the amount of time and craft with an acoustic guitar. So that was some of the thoughts that we were spinning out in the green room and talking about the difference between you know, a computer-generated high-definition JPEG in your home as opposed to an oil painting that smells like an oil painting, or having a piece of vinyl in your house, you know, that you play on the turntable. You got to pick it up, put it on there, and the young folks who have been socialized into just experiencing downloading something online are looking at it going, yeah, hey, you know, liner notes, you know, with all these, you know, pictures, and it's an album. You pick it up, you touch it, you know, it's got this black vinyl on it, you handle it a certain way, and you put it on the turntable and drop a needle on it. There's all this tactile process that happens before you listen to the music itself, and that's part of the experience. So one is not necessarily going to kill the other.
We were talking about authenticity. I mean, what my dream is that most artists, and I have to come at it from an artist perspective here, use AI as a tool to create new kinds of authenticity. You know, that it's just one of the many things in their tool chest to look at things a different way and create a whole new way of looking at things that is uniquely original and human, because I think most people still want that, hopefully.
Absolutely. Cassidy, when you mentioned that you had, was it 160 users in different countries?
160 countries.
Oh.
Yeah, users.
Ooh. Okay. I got that one backwards, but yeah, okay. Yeah, okay. 160 countries, different countries. And how many users would you expect that?
I don't know the number, but it's a lot, yeah.
Okay. The thing that really struck me about what you were saying was that there's sort of an area where you know, one could place almost like the artist's observations or personal narratives with the archive.
Yeah.
And nowadays there's a blend with some artists, some high-profile artists, that, you know, there's a blend between the archive and the art, where the archive is the art, or the art is the archive, and it sits kind of in this gray area in between. And I'm just wondering what kind of feedback you've gotten from some of the artists that you have doing this, in regards to how it may have freed them up with the notes and things of that nature on the.
Gosh, I mean, it does exactly that, as it frees up your mental load. I know some artists I've spoke to as well, they're creating a piece in a flurry, or, you know, they're creating it and not really sure why, but they're keeping track of just thoughts they're having, or notes, or things that are happening around them, and then they're able years later to go back to that piece and kind of understand it from a new perspective, and then see their former self write the notes that were happening for that piece and be able to have a conversation with that past version as well. And then if you're uploading, you know, it's remarkable when you see all of your work over a career at once, all of the images, and see the trajectory of your own through line as an artist as well, and see your growth, or see, you know, everything connected in a certain way that you didn't realize it was connected, and these, you know, series that were started over here. Wow, I was actually tackling that same thing in the very beginning when I was just starting out, you know. Or my sketches, I can see that that sketch that I created a decade ago, whoa, it showed up in this piece I just made, you know. So that's another powerful way that kind of having all of that in one place really helps inform yourself with this comprehensive understanding of your whole career.
All right, all right. And Andrea, when I was listening to you, a lot of emotions came up, clearly, because that's kind of what prompted me to start talking about my family and everything. But one of the things that kind of, or that very much touched me, was this notion that the archive is really for the audience unborn, as of yet. And so as an artist, I've kind of felt that before as well, and it helped me with not necessarily being recognized in some different areas, because the reality is art, that is the metaphysical magic, if you will, of art, is that this guy, toiling away in a cornfield somewhere and dies a pauper, will be seen by people, lined up like at a stadium to see his artwork. Van Gogh, I went to see the Van Gogh show in LA probably 20 years ago, and there are people paying, big money really to wait in the long lines to zigzag back and forth in this huge building where his painting's probably worth more than the building they're shown in. What would he have thought of that, in the 19th century or whatever, Would he have ever imagined such a thing? And so the value of, I'm just underlining the value of what you do in regards to that, and wondered if you had any personal narratives from folks who have really, followed the course and taken the time to take VHS tapes or whatever they are, and have decided, hey, my grandson so-and-so is going to get these, or I'm leaving this to, various people, what that process looks like in a personal narrative.
Yeah, absolutely, thank you. So you may have noticed one thing I always do is give people homework. And so that ends up happening at work is, people will come and they'll digitize their materials, and then I'd say, well, go home and share it now. If you have something like silent film, 8mm, 16mm, or Super 8, it's silent. So when you have a digital copy, you think, oh, I have to have a production studio and an audio engineer. No, you have a smartphone. Just play your silent film and just talk about it on your smartphone. Just record yourself talking about it. It doesn't have to be fancy. Just tell the story. Because unfortunately, I get the other end of this more than not, which is people come to us after a loved one has passed on, and they say, I don't know what any of this is. I guess my mom took this trip. I don't know what happened. They just don't know the stories. Me sitting with my grandmother, unfortunately, it's rare for my generation. So a lot of people don't know their stories. They don't know their family stories. So, it's just something to just tell the stories. In fact, I've actually said to people, even without something digital, just start recording yourself on your phone and then just send it out to your grandkids. Just send them audio messages. Just tell your story. Do your homework.
I actually recently saw a woman use the platform actually for a family who the members were all over the world. They all logged in, had this one account, and started documenting their family items. And then they each were adding in stories in the descriptions, and they were able then to add their own anecdotes, able to add other images, and then also the family was able to establish, who this was going to. And that was something that I never thought about using it in that way, but that's a benefit sometimes of having something online as well, is if you have family members all over and you don't know how to connect with them to also get this story told to everyone, it's a really unique way too.
Yeah, and it occurs to me now that this is really a very democratizing way of empowering the masses of people with the control of our own narratives. Now there's enough off-the-shelf technology, really, where in the past, it was much more difficult, I would think, in order to be historicized when, you can't print a book, you can't. Nowadays, someone can basically write and print their own history book, sit it on the shelf, and wait for their grandchildren to pick it up years later and, get it published, things of that nature. And so if the control of narrative is basically the most powerful tool, if you will, in a society, and it just might be, then something has happened here in the last couple of generations, and we should all be very excited about it. And what we have on stage with us here are the people, the experts, who have companies and some that they've created themselves and some that they've worked for many decades that can empower a great deal of us now to take control of our own personal narratives. So I'm applauding you all and thanking you very much today for sharing your knowledge and expertise. And I guess I could open this up to questions from the audience. Yeah. Do you have any questions off of the tube, off of YouTube?
Hey, thank you very much. I really enjoyed what I heard, and I just had a couple of questions because I'm a visual artist, photography, video, and so on, and I gave a photo, one to Tina Marie. That photo ended up in an unsung program, documentary. And I should have some. They didn't pay me a dime. I didn't get nothing, and they used my copyrighted material. It's been published. It's a picture of her and Rick James back in the day. It's been published, so I'm trying to understand what recourse I might have. And I've got others, and there's another picture of Tupac. They used it in another documentary that I had.
Wow.
Nobody comes to see me. I shared it with somebody. They gave it to somebody else, but I know it's my work because I put a mark in it that they don't know about, that I can prove it's my stuff. So I wonder if you can help address how can I resolve that. One of them was one of the big companies that does the unsung, but I'm interested.
Yeah, sure. Join Artist Rights Society. We could help you out first and foremost. But if you handle it on your own, you should take action as soon as you're aware of the infringement. The fact that it's been used without your permission, be in contact with them, put them on alert that they've used it, and seek compensation for it. Something like a use in a film, it's not like you're going to get them to take the film away or remove it from the film, but it's a great position for you to be in to get compensation. So do you have connections with the two uses, the producers or anything?
People that use it, I don't, but I can find them.
Yeah.
Okay. Beautiful, beautiful. That's what we're looking for.
The CLA lawyers are sending out cease and desist and accounting letters all the time before making a demand for damages and potentially taking the matter to federal court as a copyright infringement claim. Of course, it was alluded to that there's a 3-year statute of limitations on the once you learn of an infringement before you can bring it, but there are also continuing infringements going on, at least with a film that continues to be broadcast. And of course, there's the obligation that you register your copyright before you can bring the action. That's a procedural requirement as well.
Now, one other question. On that 1978 information that I saw, sorry about that, how does that relate to what you just said, the 1978, there was some mention, or I think in your docs?
Well, any work created after 1978, once it's created, it's copyrighted. I mean, MJ's point about registration, that's necessary for a lawsuit. You do have to register the work for that, but you don't have to register it to license your work. you're getting into some trickier areas because we're dealing with an infringement.
But for our larger audience, I would say, make it a business practice, a habit to register your works when they're published, because now with the internet and the proliferation of imagery or music online, there's a big statutory difference between bringing an action after the registering after you've learned of it and registering before the infringement occurs. And the big differences are, if you have registered before the infringement occurs, you're entitled to up to $150,000 in statutory damages.
Wow.
For the willful, wrongful use of your artwork. Otherwise, you're limited to just actual damages. What's the actual value of that use in the film, which may be a few $1,000s. The second thing, and this may be the more important, is prevailing party attorney's fees. You only get those if you've registered before the infringement. That means the other side has to pay your fees when you prevail in the action. That's enough to force a settlement on a claim or demand, at least in my practice, 95% of the time.
Wow.
Good afternoon. I'm Linda Parker Pennington, or LPP, you know me. I actually came because of Dwayne and Tracy. So I wanted to say what an amazing job you all have done, because you have inspired me. Andrea, I will be doing my homework as soon as I get home, I promise. Because I am a patron of the arts and an art collector. And I sat on the San Francisco Arts Commission for 4 years. And the thing that I've discovered being a historian and having moved to San Francisco 25 years ago is that there's a lot of precious history out here in these photographs, old film footage, stories that have been written. Every once in a while I unearth an article that's been written about, Charles Sullivan or Leola King or, any of the great people who, were here in San Francisco during the Jazz Age, before and beyond then. This city has an amazing history, and a lot of it is just buried. I mean, literally, it just breaks my heart. And in particular, the San Francisco African American Historical and Cultural Society has a bunch of stuff sitting in a basement somewhere, probably going to seed, that really should be digitized and preserved and then accessible for all of us here. So, okay, I'll get off my soapbox. And I'll just say that I really think that this should be an annual event, because so many people need to know about this, and I hope we can push out the video on YouTube broadly. I will personally send it to everybody I know, and I really appreciate you taking the time to share your wisdom with us today.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Okay, hold on. I'm coming. There you go.
Thank you, and thank you to everyone. Of course, thank you, Tracy. I had a question for you, Janice. So I think you answered it, but I just wanted to clarify that if I have work and photography or paintings and I didn't get it copyright, is it okay for someone to go and resell it, or is it not okay?
Sorry. So you created a work and you sold it.
Yes.
You sold the physical copy.
Yes.
They can resell it.
They can resell it without copyright.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Even if you registered the work, they're entitled as the owner of that work. They could do whatever they want with it, except for under VARA and moral rights, they can't destroy it. But they could sell it. What maybe the thing I was talking about earlier is that we're trying to expand rights for artists and get artists paid more often, and to get artists a percentage on that secondary sale. So if you sold your photograph for $200 and then 20 years later it's worth $150,000, we're trying to fight so that you'll get 5% on that secondary sale at auction. So it is encouraging creativity, as well as respecting the fact that your work increased in value and you should participate in that financially.
MJ?
Yeah, what Janet's referring to is the resale royalty laws. That's one of the statutes that CLA lawyers helped get enacted in the late 70s, but in the last 5 years, it was deemed to be unconstitutional on the one hand, but more particularly, the first sale doctrine of the Copyright Act, which Janet was alluding to but didn't mention, gives the purchaser of any work of art or a book or a record the right to resell it without there being any interest in the original creator. That could be changed with a federal Resale Royalty Act, but that will take a real leap by our legislators.
Right. I think that's pretty much the, oh,
I have a question. Is that the image right, too? Or is that just the physical piece?
Just the physical. And MJ was referring to, there was a resale, there still technically is, I think, a resale in California. It's just not really enforceable, just in California. But what we're trying to champion is a federal bill, which will be difficult. No, that's just a regular copyright infringement. So if your photograph was taken and used on a shirt without your permission, then that's a copyright infringement, and you could be in touch with them for compensation or cease and desist.
The copyright's not the physical work. The copyright is the image that is in the physical work. Let's distinguish those two. The physical work is personal property. Different.
right. Okay, I think that was the last question. And I want to thank our panelists here today for doing such a wonderful, insightful job. Thank you so much, and then I'll pass this along after. On to Tracy here.
Thank you all again. I sincerely appreciate you for all that you shared today, all of this wonderful expertise, this wonderful information, and I hope that the artists who have been here today and the artists who are attending online will take the time to do what they need to do to protect their work, protect their legacy, and make sure that they can make best use of their own creative properties. I also would be remiss if I did not thank one of our leading sponsors, the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council. They have been at the forefront of the fight for saving Black lives from tobacco industry targeting for decades. And we are grateful to them for all that they do. They have wonderful programming. We also, I consider myself a lifetime member of the AATCLC, and we like to say we love our Black smokers. If you are a person who is working to free yourself from the bondage of nicotine addiction, know that we are here for you. We love you, no judgment, and we are here to support you in living a healthier and even better life. So you can check them out by going to aatclc.org or savingblacklives.org and learn more about this wonderful organization, as well as support them. So I also want to once again thank the African American Center here at the San Francisco Public Library, which is beloved to me. This library provided for me, this library system provided for me as a child. I was a voracious reader, and I would never have been able to afford to buy all the books that I read. So the library has been a long friend for years. And Shauna, running the African American Center, bringing such wonderfully dynamic programming. Thank you so much for all that you did to organize. And thank you to the team here at the San Francisco Public Library. The last thing I want to tell you about, and one more sponsor, thank you, California Arts Council. They provided also the funding necessary to be able to make this possible. So they are an important community partner for me and many arts organizations, so thank you, thank you, thank you. I want to share with you about From Benin to the Bay. This is for Bridges Diasporic Arts. This is our annual event series, and this year focuses on healing. It's in the November-October timeframe, and this year's events are also fantastic. On the 20th, we have an opening reception to welcome Her Majesty the Queen Mother, Duoti Desir, back to the Bay Area for a series of events, and she is going to address the community on a case for spiritual reparations. Okay, and then on the 22nd, there will be a workshop on making Govi vessels for release and renewal. Govi vessels are out of the Haitian spiritual tradition. We also have a workshop on healing modalities for anti-Blackness in Black institutions. And know that this is not a call out of any institution or finger pointing. It's recognizing that colonization did a number on all of us. And sometimes we end up using the tools of the colonizer against ourselves without knowing it. So the idea is to, from a space of healing, utilize indigenous tools and what we have as a community to heal that so that we can carry on, because we need each other. Also, on the 26th, we'll have a presentation on cultivating intimate connections with our origins of arts and culture. And that's for whatever traditions we come from. How do we cultivate intimate connections with those traditions so that we can have long-lasting connections and really be able to glean all of the wisdom and healing that those traditions have to bring. On the 4th of November, we have Movement Medicine, Dances of the Fon, which is an ethnic group from the Republic of Benin, previously known as Dahomey. And it is Dances of the Fon for Resilient Healing. So it is a dance class as well as a lecture on the activation of the spine and the pelvis in the dances of the Fon people for the sake of healing and renewal. And then one of our last programs this year will be on November 5th, and that is using sound to release the fury. That's using sound technology and using the sound vibrations that we have utilized for years. Just think of drumming and the role that drumming and other instruments and sound instruments have played in our healing processes. So we're going to actually be learning about and utilizing sound in a workshop to bring about healing within ourselves. So I hope to see you there. We'll have this poster out on the table outside, and then for those at home, you can scan the screen, the QR code on the screen, and anyone who registered for this workshop will receive a notice about it. So that said, once again, thank you everyone. Thank you for coming, and we look forward to seeing you in October.